So you've made it to building inclusive leadership, embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion. Here at CalTrin, we are so excited to still be offering and highlighting the importance of DEI trainings, why they are important to the work that we do every day, especially in the communities that we're in. And so I just want to make sure to highlight that. But more importantly, I also want to talk about our wonderful trainer. So on the next slide, we have Renisha Jackson, who's going to be providing this training for us. She's founder and chief leadership officer of Evolve. She's over a decade of experience working alongside mission-driven organizations, partnering with boards, executive leaders, and also staff, and brings a community-informed, practice-oriented approach to inclusive leadership. And she has a Master of Science, and with a concentration in nonprofit and association in management. And not only that, is she's just a wonderful trainer. She's on the ball today already. So we love having presenters who are here. She's ready to engage with you. So with that being said, I will go ahead and hand it over to Renisha.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Speaking and talking and engaging with you all about inclusive leadership is one of my favorite things to do. So, as Casey shared, I am the founder of Evolve Training, Coaching, Facilitation, and I love to train and coach and facilitate. So, I'm in my element here today with you all as nonprofit leaders and those in the community that are doing great work around child and family services. So, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for being here today as we dive into building inclusive leadership, specifically around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Casey already did a great job of kind of setting the tone today, but I also want to just double down on that and say my job here today is to create a supportive learning space for you. So please care for your needs. The chat is here. Please use the Q&A if you have any questions. Your tea, your water, your dogs, your whatever's happening in life all around you is welcome here in this space. I just ask that you stay engaged with us, whether that's coming off of mute and lifting your voice or using the Q&A or using the emoji reactions. It's really important that I know you're here and that we're engaging with one another, but take care of yourself. We're going to be here for 2 hours. We will take a break at the top of the hour for about 10 minutes, but if you need to get up, stretch, move around, please feel free to do so. During our breakouts, I just ask that you please use confidentiality. So whatever lessons you learn here today in our time together, please feel free to take them out with you back into your work and into your communities. But if you hear from individuals about experiences that they have had, names of organizations, all of those things, we kind of want to leave them here in this space. And we also want to speak from our own experiences. We are here together to learn and grow, but we've all had different experiences around inclusive leadership. So today, as you're talking, as you're engaging, we would love to hear from your experience. Try not to generalize, and let's make space for different perspectives and different ways that people have experienced things. Lastly, engagement and presence. Casey already shared, there are many ways to engage today. And then if for whatever reason something's not working for you, you need some additional support, please let us know in the chat. And Lana is here to help, and Casey as well, to ensure you have what you need to be successful. So now that we have all of that stuff out of the way, I want to know a little bit more about who is here in this space with us today. So if you're willing to share, please in the chat share your name, the mission you help support. So no matter if you work in finance or if you work at direct service or whatever your role is within the nonprofit, whether you're a board member or a volunteer, what's the mission that you help to support? And why does inclusive leadership matter to you? What brought you here to this space today to engage with the topic of inclusive leadership? Why does it matter to you? Why does it matter to the mission that you work towards every single day? So I would love to learn more about who we have in the space today. So take a moment to share in the chat, just so that we can all kind of understand and know who's here, but also why this topic is important to you, because that will help us later on during our time together. As you all are doing that, I'm going to share a little bit about our objectives today. So we're going to focus on how to turn diversity, equity, and inclusion into everyday leadership practices that will allow you to show up as a leader who practices inclusion. And so by the end of our time together, you're going to leave with a clear understanding of how bias, privilege, and systemic barriers can show up on your team and in your decision making, as well as practical ways that you can apply inclusive leadership to your day-to-day work. And I'm also going to share some tools that can support stronger team environments. It can help you with retention and really support the long-term impact of the work that you all are doing in the community. So I see that we have a few people who are sharing interested in increasing knowledge and skills to support their organization and local school districts. I also see that Cindy shared a refresher on communication as a program director. Sometimes we become too much leader, not enough partner. I love that. That's amazing. It was a great opportunity for me to gather some information. So thank you. Thank you all for being here and for thinking about why this is important to you, right? Because some people are in leadership positions and it's not necessarily a priority for their leadership to reflect inclusivity. So it really means a lot to me that you all found this topic to be something of importance and that you already recognize that being an inclusive leader, it doesn't just impact the people that you lead, it doesn't just impact your organization, but it impacts your mission as well, right? It impacts the way that you're able to deliver on what you promise to your community, but it also impacts the way that they experience your work, right? What your team is able to say they experience day in and day out truly impacts your constituents in the community that you serve. So I love so much all of the responses that you all are sharing here in the chat today. And so you basically already started us, down this role. Why is this important? Leadership really shapes culture, whether you are intentional about it or not, right? It is going to shape what people experience and what people feel day in and day out. Equity is something that shows up in small everyday decisions. So today we'll talk a little bit about equity, and it's a loaded word, but the most important thing for you to take away from today is that it really is the small things that compound and really show how equity shows up in your organizations. And we also know that teams do their best work when people feel seen and they feel supported. And so you already answered this question a little bit earlier, but like, what makes you feel supported at work? If you could think of a specific time, if you could recall a specific project or something that you were working on where you felt like, man, I really felt supported during this project or during this time, what made that possible for you? Was it the fact that someone listened to you during that time? Was it the fact that someone asked your preferences? What was it that made you feel fully supported at work? And the more we talk about it, the more we think about it, whatever it was that made you feel fully supported can probably link back to some form of inclusion or equity or diversity, right? Because it helped you to feel like, hey, I have what I need as an individual to be able to fully show up here in this place. So for you all that are most of you are working in child and family serving institutions, inclusive leadership is not just a statement, but it really shapes how well your organization cares for the people that you care for, how you make decisions, and how you really deliver on your mission. And that's why this matters. In case anyone came here today not completely sure why this is super important. So before we move forward, I do want to ground in some shared language because it is really, really hard to move into practice when we're not all speaking about the same thing. So when you start having conversations around diversity, equity, and inclusion, a lot of times people are interchanging those words to mean different things. And it's hard to have a conversation or even talk about the practice because we're not using the word the same way. We're using it differently, right? And when that happens, it can create confusion or tension or even avoidance. Like sometimes, especially today, people avoid the words diversity, equity, and inclusion because there's tension around it, right? And Part of that is because we're not really clear on what we mean when we say these words. So we're going to start with that so that we're all here on the same page today as we're using these words throughout the training. And so diversity is the first one. And diversity is really about who is present, right? The mix of perspectives and lived experiences in any one place. So a lot of times when people say diversity, they are using it to mean race or representation, or they may say, I really need a diverse team, but they're not really clear about what that means, if they mean diverse in the way that we appear, right? Or if they mean diverse in our experiences. And a lot of times when people say diversity, if we're doing grant applications or, we're engaging on a program, when we say diversity, it means a numbers-based goal. So they're looking at how many people do we have that represent this or that, or whatever the case may be. And a lot of times, when we define diversity that way, we don't allow for real diversity in the space. And when I say real diversity, it means a mix of not just the people and the way that they identify, but also their perspectives and their lived experiences as well. So today, as we're talking about diversity, we are talking about who is present and whose perspectives are included in a space. Sometimes you can look at a team and everyone on that team may identify as female, right? But it doesn't mean it's not a diverse team, right? If we can have diversity in age, we can have diversity in experience, in education, in lived experience. We can have diversity in the what we practice at home, spiritual practices, languages, all of those things contribute to diversity. So sometimes we really oversimplify the term diversity, and people end up not engaging with it on a high level because they are really only using it to represent one thing. And the reality is diversity is really about the measure of a difference in a group. So who is in the room? How can we measure the difference of those individuals in the room? And are those perspectives present? So are there any questions about diversity before we move forward? Anything that I can clear up? Any thoughts, questions, anything that you would like to add? So next we're defining equity. A lot of times when people say equity, they're talking about, oh, we need to be fair, in a very general sense. We need to make sure that everyone is treated the same. Or maybe they're saying, this is our commitment to equity, but it's super vague. It's not, it's like, oh, we have this commitment to being an equitable workspace. Okay, well, what does that mean, right? A lot of times people use equity and equality interchangeably, and the reality is they are two different words. So, equality is really about distributing the exact same resources and opportunity to everyone. Equity really helps to understand and recognize when you practice equity that we all start from different starting places, right? So if you look at this image of the bikes, this is a really, really good example of equality versus equity, where at the top, you have provided everyone with the same exact bike. We want them all to make it to the finish line. And so we've given them all the same bike to get to the finish line. However, we see by that picture, not everyone is going to make it to the finish line with that same bike, right? The bike is too big for some people. The bike is too small for others. There are people in that photo who can't even engage with that bike, right? So with equality, yes, we've given everyone the same thing, but it does not mean that they're all going to make it to the finish line with that bike. Whereas when equity is present, as we see in the bottom at the bottom here, everyone got the bike that they needed to be successful, right? Did everybody get a bike? Yes, they did. But they got the bike that they needed to make it to the finish line, right? It's not the same exact bike. And that's what equity looks like in practice. So on an organizational level, when I work with nonprofits, most of them do have an equity statement. And one of the first questions that we unpack is, what does this look like in practice, right? So it's great that you have this statement, but I also need to know, what does it mean for how you support people within your workspace, right? If we are onboarding staff and we're onboarding every single person the same way. We're giving them this set of videos and we're telling them to watch all 19 videos and come back to us if we have any questions. That is not an equitable way to engage, right? Or that is not yes, it's not an equitable way to engage. That's equality. We're giving everyone the same thing, but it doesn't mean that everyone is going to leave that process with what they need to be truly successful. Are there any thoughts or questions here? Okay. And the last one is inclusion. So a lot of times when people use the word inclusion, they use it to mean, being nice or making people feel welcomed or even like avoiding conflict, which is not what we want to do, right? When we say we want an inclusive workspace, it doesn't mean that, we tiptoe around things or we avoid conflict. Inclusion is really about how people experience the team and whether they feel heard and able to contribute, right? In this space, we are using inclusion to mean whether people feel heard, respected, and whether they feel like they can engage on a higher level. And a lot of times we say, inclusion is not just being invited to the party, but it's also being asked to dance, being provided with a drink and with snacks, right? Like we want you to fully engage. We want you to come to the party, but we also want you to have a good time, right? We want you to meet people. We want you to engage. We want you to enjoy yourself. And that's what inclusion means. It's not just saying we're an inclusive organization or we're an inclusive team because we invite people here or people have access. It's not just about that. It's also about the engagement. So if you are working to be an inclusive leader, one of the questions that you always need to ask your team is how they're experiencing the workplace, right? And you have to make it safe for them to share it with you, right? So what do you need to be successful? How can I best support you? What has your experience been? When you're checking in at that 3 month and that 6 month and that 1 year and 2 year mark, really genuinely asking people what their experience has been like and how you can help improve it is a really good way, not just to model inclusion, but to make sure that whatever you're doing to ensure that the space is inclusive really matches what the people in that space mean. It's not enough for us to just guess how we can be inclusive. To be truly inclusive, we need to understand what people need on our teams to feel and be included. And in order to understand that, we have to ask and we have to make it safe for them to be honest and share with us. So that's what inclusion means today as we are talking about inclusion throughout our time together. So, CalTrin is located in California. I'm sure most of you on the call are in California. If you're not, you might not recognize these pictures. But if you are, what is this? What is this place?
In and out.
Yes. Do you like In and Out, Miss Rhonda?
Yes, I do.
So, I have a question for you, Miss Rhonda. When you go to In and Out, do you get your fries animal style?
Yes, I do.
Okay, here we go.
Burger
This
too. Burger too. Burger
I
as
love
well.
it.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So if you don't know what animal style, if you don't know what In-N-Out Burger is, In-N-Out Burger is an amazing burger chain. I believe it started in California. I'm not quite sure, but I know that it's very prevalent. As someone who I lived on the East Coast most of my life, when I moved to California, I had no clue what this was. I would drive by and I would be like, "What are all these cars doing in the street?" Right? They were in line for In-N-Out Burger, and now I know why. So In-N-Out Burger has different options, right? They're actually very slim, limited options. There's 3 food options, but they have fries that are on the secret menu. So if you pull up and you look at the menu, you're not going to see animal style fries. But if you go here, you eat here, you know that this is a thing. And animal style fries come with like cheese and onions, and it has the spread on top. So these loaded fries. However, is there anybody on the call today who doesn't like In-N-Out Burger at all? Don't care for it. It's okay. This is a safe space. You can tell us. Anybody like, this is not my place. Okay. Okay. If there was
We have a
someone
couple
who's
people in the chat, it looks like.
okay. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. Or is it Anna? Is it Anna or Anna?
Anna, thanks for asking.
Thank you, Anna. So a couple people saying, I don't even like In-N-Out Burger, right? So what would it be like if we all worked together for a company and I said, hey, In-N-Out Burger is coming. We're going to have a staff lunch and it's going to be In-N-Out Burger. For those people who say, no, I do not like In-N-Out Burger. I don't want it. It's not good to me. They would not even want to come to the lunch, right? Whereas the people who love In-N-Out Burger, they would feel very included. They would feel like, hey, this was created for me, right? And if I said In-N-Out Burger is coming and they're gonna let us have animal style fries, Miss Rhonda would be like, okay, yes, right? She would be like, that's yes, I see the thumbs up. So the reality is that inclusion, this is an example of how inclusion can look and feel differently for everyone. So if I were to bring this and I were to say this is the option, this is what we're going to do, this is how we're going to celebrate. For some of you on this call, this is exactly what you want, what you need, what would make you feel very celebratory. For others of you here in this space today, you would be like, I don't want this, I don't want to engage with this. I guess I have to bring my own sandwich to the party, right? So, in order to be a truly inclusive leader, you have to be willing to do what I just did, right? And ask people what they need, what they enjoy, what they can engage with, what matters to them, what's most important, right, for them to be able to engage. And in order to really be an inclusive leader, you have to do a lot of listening. And that's one thing that many leaders don't have a lot of time for within our sector, right? To listen and learn because there's so much happening and there's so much going on and it's such a fast-paced sector, right? There's always a lot to do. Things are moving rapidly, especially right now. So making space to truly be able to listen and learn from the people on your team is something that we have to really promote on an organizational level to be able to practice inclusive leadership. Okay. So creating a workspace where people really feel like they belong, um, it has to do with the experience of feeling accepted, respected, and able to fully show up and contribute as yourself. It really goes beyond, as I said earlier, being included in the room, but it's really about how people experience being in that room. And so together, diversity, equity, and inclusion, if you are practicing those things, you really create a space where people feel like they belong. They feel like this is a space that was created for me and I can fully engage here. And when you have belonging in a workspace, it's different. It really is. And I can say that as someone who, worked within many different organizations, but I have been an executive director. I have worked in development. And now even as a consultant, I can see the difference of organizations who truly have belonging and the way that their teams work together versus those who do not. And it really does make a difference in how you're able to serve the community and the different resources that you can attract and the way that you build community for your organization. So as you practice these things together, just know, even if you're not calling it belonging, you are creating a space of belonging where people can show up and really fully engage on behalf of your organization. Okay, I'm gonna pause here. Any thoughts, questions, anything before we move forward? Okay.
I
So,
think one of the main takeaways that I've heard is the inclusiveness when you were talking about how you are you need to ask people how they're experiencing the workplace, and the people should feel safe to tell you so. And as a leader, we have to sit with that. We have to sit with that, not make them feel as if, they're wrong for speaking out, but make them feel safe. So that was very, very good. Thank you.
thank you, and thank you for recalling that because that was a really important point around sitting with that. Because oftentimes we don't. As leaders, we feel this pressure to always have to have an answer or response right away. And when you're practicing inclusive leadership, you do need to take time to kind of process and understand what people are doing or what people are saying and what people's experiences are on your team or within your workplace. So being willing and okay with saying, thank you for sharing that with me. I really would like some time to think more about what you shared. Can we revisit this or can we come back to this? Is such an important thing and such an intuitive thing to be able to do as a leader, because sometimes it hurts, right? If you think you're doing a great job and you're like, oh, I got the best team in the organization, you think everything's going well, and you get some feedback, it can kind of sting a little bit. And so right away, if you feel like, hey, I have to respond to this right away, it might not be the most inclusive response. So a lot of times we do need to take time to think about what people say, process our own emotions as leaders, and be willing to kind of go back to this. And sometimes you have more questions, right? Okay, help me understand this a little bit more. Give me an example of this, and that's okay. But that is a true way of showing up as an inclusive leader and really promoting equity, not feeling like right away I have to respond to everything, because sometimes it's not going to be the right response. Okay. All right. So now we are going to do a little case study. We're going to do a breakout discussion, and so it will be a 10-minute breakout. But this case study really is about you putting yourself in the shoes of a leader. And this might be something that's familiar to you. It might not be. But let's just say you are Diana, and Diana is in this leadership team meeting where they are working together to plan a new program. So something new, something exciting is coming to the organization. It's really going to support the community, and everyone is super, super excited about it. The conversation is very active. The ideas are flowing quickly, and it's like, yes, we're in our zone. Everything is coming together, lots of ideas. And then there are two team members who are typically a little bit quieter, who haven't said anything. And Diana notices, okay, we haven't necessarily heard from these people. But then she recalls feedback from another manager that these team members haven't really demonstrated strong leadership skills because they don't really speak up in meetings. And so as the discussion continues, Diana is holding this perspective while she's kind of observing and listening and learning. And so in your group, I specifically did not give you a lot of context here because I would love for you in your group to look at this situation and consider, what do you all think is happening from your perspective? What assumptions might be present in this situation? And then as a leader who is practicing inclusivity and who wants to become more inclusive, what might you do in this situation? And then also considering, what might equity look like in this situation, right? So again, you are a program director, you're in a meetings with other program leads, other program direct staff, outreach staff, and you're coming up with this new program, lots of ideas, everyone's excited, but there are two team members who they haven't said anything. And you remember that one of your leadership team members recently said to you that these two team members don't really show leadership skills because they rarely speak up in meetings. So we are going to go into a 10-minute breakout room. Again, Lana is going to help facilitate that. And I just want to very briefly recall the expectations for breakout rooms. I will share this case study into the breakout room, so you should be able to see it on your screen. So no need to write anything down. It'll be right there for you to see it. And just remember, if you take space, make space. So we have 10 minutes, but there'll be quite a few of you in the breakout room. So if you've shared some thoughts and ideas, feel free to tag someone else in that you haven't heard from, or give someone else an opportunity to engage. Welcome back, everyone. That 10 minutes just rolled by so quickly. Breakout rooms just go so fast. Even if I gave you 30 minutes, you all would be like, oh my God, it's not enough time, because they just go, the conversation starts going and then it's done. So thank you so much for engaging and being willing to engage with one another around the case study. And I would love to ask room three, which was Bethany, Carmen, um, Dillian, hope I'm saying that right, Jason, and Stefiana. Is anyone from that room willing to kind of share what came up during your breakout, and maybe your responses to some of these questions?
I kind of caught the tail end of, I think, what was my name?
Yes, yes. So the question was just, you all at room three, would you be willing to kind of share just the summary of what was shared in your room?
Oh, I can if no one else wants to. Um, I think we all kind of agreed that we didn't really feel it was the best way to describe the person as not having strong leadership because they rarely speak up at meetings. That's a pretty bold assumption. Um, so yeah, we talked about that and some different ways that we could maybe help this person communicate their thoughts and feedback by speaking to them before or after the meeting. Um, uh, Someone mentioned gallery walks around, like maybe just like pictures of the slides or whatever, so people could put post-its or some sort of note on them. We talked about Mentimeter and Cahoots as like different platforms to help people, not necessarily be able to speak, but give feedback. And yeah, possibly asking people that are regularly attending these meetings if they want to establish like meeting norms, so that they create like a safe space and possibly surveying people that are attending these meetings to see what their communication style even is.
Yes. Thanks. Amazing. Great job to room three. And thank you for being willing to step in on the spot like that. What about room four? That was Cynthia, Elvia, Martha, Sylvia, and Tierra. Is anybody willing to share?
I so Sylvia, you want to go ahead? Please do.
You were doing such a great job in using how you were expressing your vocals and being present. So you know what, Cynthia, I'm gonna let you take the lead.
Let's go, Cynthia.
I told them it's really unusual because I'm normally the quiet one. So when
Mhm,
I was reading the whole thing, I was like, oh, that's me. Because I usually sit back and I observe and I learn a lot actually from the other
mhm.
leaders.
Yes.
Because it doesn't speak up doesn't mean I'm not a good leader. And so
Mhm,
then for her to hold that perspective while she's observing the room was, like I think it was Alvia made the comment that was, carrying a bias with her.
mhm,
And
mhm.
we all were pretty much in agreement about the fact that that assumption was incorrect based, that just because somebody isn't loud and outspoken doesn't mean they're not a good leader. Um, and then an inclusive leader would take the time to say maybe have questionnaires or the post-it notes or something so that everybody could have the opportunity for feedback.
Yes.
And that's what equity would look like in the situation, would be to offer an open floor to everyone. So
Yes. 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 I'm sorry. I love that so, so much. Um, and I love that you all were even sharing tools of like, hey, you could use sticky notes, you could use Mentimeter, you
yes.
can use all of these different things to engage with people because that's the truth. Like inclusion in practice in this situation, um, instead of really moving forward with like the loudest voices or the fastest voices, as the leader in this room, Diana really pauses and says, hey, before we move on, I want to hear from people that I haven't heard from yet, right? Maybe giving the group a minute to write down their thoughts before opening the conversation again. Or even, as you all have shared, making space for people to have like a gallery wall where they can come back to it. They can look, they can write notes, they can process before they come back and provide input. The reality is that we all process things differently. Some things faster, some things slower. And not even about processing, but also about the way that we are willing and able to engage. I'm a trainer, but I'm also very introverted, right? So if I'm in a space where there are a lot of people who kind of like push their way in to talk, I generally, just like Cynthia, I will sit back and kind of just let it happen, right? Let it happen. And so you may not get my input, which may be very valuable in that type of space, because I'm one who loves to listen, but I also will not like overtalk someone. So it's really important that as you all think about inclusion in practice, that you also think about how you can weave inclusion into the way that you work in general, right? So saying, this is how we approach meetings that are for collaboration, right? We never want you to give feedback in real time. If you have it, great. But we always set our meetings up in ways where people have time to think about what was being shared, come back, they can write things down, they can submit things, or they can look and take notes at the same time, but giving space so that people have time to think and process as the standard for how you engage is really important part of inclusivity in practice. And then also, someone had shared this in the chat earlier while you all were in the breakout rooms. I was going through the chat. Someone shared earlier that inclusion is really, for them, is really not about being pushed into the existing way of working, but really, as leaders, changing how the work happened so that more people can be a part of it in real ways, right? So a lot of times it's like, I want to be a more inclusive leader, but the way that our workspaces are designed, I don't have time to go to every person and ask them what they need or how to implement it and all of these things. So a lot of leaders really struggle with the implementation part. Like, it's not that they don't know what inclusivity looks like in practice, it's that it's challenging to implement that into the existing way of working. And so when you get to a place where you are in leadership, right, and you have the ability to kind of impact some of these ways of working, it's really important that you are able and willing to say, can we look at how these things are structured and can we adjust them so that they are more inclusive, right? So that leaders are not trying to, within a system, readjust things to match inclusivity. It really needs to happen on a higher level. And that's one of the most important things that I would like for you all to take away from this as individuals who are leaders, even if you don't have the role of director, supervisor, program manager, project manager, whatever the case may be, even if you don't have that title, if you are in a position where others look to you to be an example of how things are done, there is a certain level of responsibility that comes with that. And being willing to speak up and say, hey, the existing way of how we do this is not really inclusive. Can we consider doing it this way? Is something that we need more leaders to do so that this is happening on an organizational level, and it's not so much tension with trying to do these things as an inclusive leader within an organization that is not in itself yet practicing inclusive leadership. Okay. So we are going to take a break in 5 minutes. But before we do this, I want to introduce to you all the concept of awareness, right? So the reality is that on any given team, everyone is going to have different levels of awareness. You are going to have individuals on your team who are just not aware of certain things. It doesn't really impact them. If it is impacting them, it doesn't impact them a lot. So their awareness of whatever that is not very high. And then you will have team members who are very hyper aware of what is happening, right? They actually can put a name to it and they can come up with solutions, right? They can talk to you about, hey, this is what I'm seeing is happening. It's a microaggression, or it's this, or it's that. And they're very aware, right? And it's okay, right? You will always have that spectrum, and you'll have people who are in between. You will have people who are aware of what's happening, but they don't want to talk about it. They don't want to make a fuss. They don't want to make a fight about it, so they don't say anything. And oftentimes, the people that we hear from are those who are at that very end of the spectrum, who are highly aware, and we often kind of label them as like the problem team member, because they are really able to verbalize to you what's happening, how it's impacting them, how it's impacting people around them, and what needs to change. And it doesn't mean that other people are not experiencing that, but they're at different levels of awareness as individuals. And that's okay, right? That is okay. And you have to know that as a leader. And so this next portion of the curriculum is really just about bias, privilege, and systems, and our levels of awareness. So as I shared, you will have people on your team who don't notice things and they say, this feels normal, this feels fine. You have people who notice things, but they're unsure. They can say to you, something feels off. This didn't feel quite right. I'm not quite sure why though. You have people who are aware, but not naming it. So I'm aware that this thing is happening, or this process is not very inclusive. It's hard to work with. It's hard to engage with, but I'm not saying anything. There are people who will name it to you and say, hey, this process of XYZ is not inclusive. And there were people who can respond with intention, so they can really help you to understand how you can move forward differently, or they're able to really verbalize that. And so that's an important part of moving into recognizing bias in the workplace. And so bias, someone already started talking about this earlier. I need you to know and understand that bias is something that is natural. It's not neutral. We all, as individuals, carry patterns that are shaped by our experiences, the environments we're currently in, that we lived in, that we grew up in, the things that we've been taught. But we have to know that bias shapes our decisions, even when our intentions are strong. Like, we could have the strongest intentions, bias can still shape our decisions. So it shows up in quick judgments, in the small decisions that you make, in those everyday interactions, not just the big decisions, right? Sometimes we're really focused on like, bias isn't happening up here or in these big decisions, but it's just as impactful when it's happening in the small ways. So when we come back from break, we are going to move a little further into. I am gently welcoming you back into the space. I hope that you were able to do something for yourself during that time. Stretch, get some water, get some sunlight. And I just want to thank Lana for that lovely music during the break. Almost went to sleep. Okay, so um, we're going to do a pop quiz. So a great way to bring you back from break. Bias in the workplace. So thinking about different types of bias, would love to know what you consider this. Leaders may give more attention, opportunities, or trust to people who communicate like them, have similar backgrounds, or share similar work styles. Others may be seen as less engaged or less ready, even if that's not true. Would you say A, that's an affinity bias, B, a confirmation bias, or C, the halo effect? And so you can put that in the chat. Which type of bias do you think that is? A, B, or C? Okay, I'm getting a lot of A's. Affinity, A. Someone said they have not heard of the halo effect. I will tell you about it. I think if I don't, remind me, and I will. So A, everyone's saying A, affinity bias, right? It is an affinity bias, right? We naturally connect with people who feel familiar to us. And it happens, right? If you've ever worked at a place where they recruit from certain schools, colleges, If they have people come into that interview and they're like, oh, we get all of our, first level managers from FSU, right? They are going to give their attention, their energy, even if they have great other applicants, because that one applicant came from a school that they have a relationship with, or all of their leadership team is their alma mater. They will give more weight to that, right? And so an affinity bias is where we naturally connect with people who feel familiar to us. And again, as I shared, bias is not something that we that's neutral. It's natural. It's what feels right. Like if something is familiar to me, it feels right. What's most important with bias is that you are able to identify it, right? Because then that helps you to be able to put practices into place that ensures that bias does not impact the way that you show up as a leader. It's going to happen. Affinity bias is something that is going to naturally come up. But if you don't know what it is and you can't put language to it, it's really hard for you to help undo some of the challenges that come with engaging in bias in the workplace. Right. So when it comes to affinity bias, sorry, my mouse is not doing the right thing. What can you do about it? People ask me all the time, okay, so we know affinity bias exists. What can we do about it? Affinity bias is really going to show up most when decisions in your workplace are informal, right? So if there's an opportunity for people to take on a new project and your boss is like, hey, just give it to whoever you think is can do a good job, right? You are probably going to tap the person that you feel most comfortable with, or you're going to offer that opportunity in passing. Oh, I saw this person, I'm going to offer the opportunity to them. But instead of making things informal, especially decisions like that are impactful, you should create structure around opportunities. So naming them openly, right? So saying at your staff meeting every week or every month or how often you meet, there's this opportunity for this high visibility project coming up, and I want to share it with everyone, right? Invite interest instead of assuming readiness. So if there's anyone who's interested in taking this project on or being a part of it, please express interest. And these are the ways that you can express your interest, right? And then even rotating stretch assignments. So a lot of times when there are things that your team members can do that can kind of help them prepare for leadership, you want to make sure that you're not always giving those preparation opportunities to the same people because of your affinity bias, right? So having a process in place where you're able to rotate those stretch assignments where people can build their skills over time. So this helps to really ensure that access is not just based on proximity or comfort. You now have structures around these opportunities so that your affinity bias is not the primary way that people are accessing new opportunities within your workspace. Who uses TikTok, and who can explain to us what a For You page is? Any TikTok users willing to come off mute and share with us? Cynthia says no. What is this? What's TikTok's For You page?
I believe TikTok's For You page, based off of what you're viewing, how long you view it, what you like, it starts to kind of cater to you based off of those videos. So it'll start to show more videos that you like that are similar to that, or show you more of that content creators like videos, right? Kind of your For You page is basically for you, what you like and what you view.
Absolutely. Giovanna, thank you so much for sharing. So TikTok's For You page is a really strong example of modern, like right now, affinity bias, right? Because what's happening behind the scene is TikTok is noticing what you watch, what you like, what you share, what you skip, and it learns your preferences very, very quickly. Like if you can use TikTok for an hour and your For You page will be like freaky, very much this is what you want to see, right? And that's what keeps you addicted to the app. It learns your preferences really quickly, and then it shows you more of the same types of content. So it is going to show you more of the same. And so over time, your feed or your For You page starts to feel very aligned with you, right? Because it's showing you more of the same stuff. But TikTok is not showing you everything. It's showing you more of what you already like. And that is the affinity bias. So there are other things that are happening, but because you're only seeing the things that you like, you double down on that, right? Or you feel like everyone feels this way because you're only seeing that one thing. So as leaders, we can do the same thing with people if we're not paying attention, right? We can further ensure that like the same people get opportunities or the same people are having access to things because it is more of what we it's what we know and it's what's more natural to us. So if I'm a leader who I personally practice direct communication, I'm probably providing more mentorship or providing more opportunities to other people who communicate the same way that I do. And so it's really important that you recognize this as something that can show up in leadership and does show up often in leadership, and really thinking about what can I implement within the way that I lead, but also within my organization to ensure that we're not we're not unintentionally using this bias to further our own agendas or what we think is best for an organization. And so this is just a really good example. I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with TikTok's For You page, but what I am saying is you have to know that there are other perspectives, there are other things happening, and that TikTok is really only showing you what they know you like and what they know you will continue to watch. And so it's really important if you're using this platform that you recognize, hey, there are other opinions or other things happening, and I should, educate myself in a way that I'm not doubling down on something that may not be the whole truth or it may not be all of what is happening. Okay. What about this next type of bias, where organizations may continue doing things a certain way because it feels familiar, even when it's not producing the outcomes they want or it's not working for everyone on the team? What type of bias is that? Would you say it's A, attribution bias, B, anchoring bias, or C, status quo bias? This happens quite a bit in nonprofit organizations where you've been doing this thing for so long. You've been doing this annual gala every year for 45 years, and it's only netting you $9,000, but you still do it because you've done it every year for 45 years, right? It feels very familiar, but it's not producing the same impact that it used to 20 years ago, right? Because the world is different, the community is different, people's priorities are different. You all are saying C. C, I see some C's. I see a couple of B's. C, B. Anna says it might be anchoring bias, but now after I said more, let's see. It is status quo bias, right? We prefer to keep things the way they are, even if change is needed. What does this look like in practice? Like I said, continuing a process that isn't working because it's familiar, or you're avoiding change because of the uncertainty or the risk, or you just default to past decisions without reevaluating them, right? I'm just going to continue to make the same decision without evaluating, dismissing new ideas because they might feel a little disruptive to the way that you have been doing things. And why does status quo bias happen? Because familiarity feels very comfortable and predictable. And right now, our world is just changing so rapidly, and all this stuff is happening. There's AI, there's funding shifts, there's all these things happening. And as nonprofit organizations, we want to retreat to what feels familiar, what feels predictable, what feels comfortable. But a lot of times that sets us back as organizations because we are not being responsive to what's happening in the world around us. Change requires a lot of time, a lot of energy, probably some conflict, right? And so this fear of getting things wrong or making things worse, really reinforces existing ways of working. But one thing that we have to embrace within the mission-driven sector is the ability to work against status quo bias, right? Of keeping things the same or keeping things familiar and not being willing to engage. There is definitely a level of safe engagement, right? I mean, it can only be so safe, but there is a level of, hey, we can try this and see if it works. And if it doesn't work, it's going to be okay. We're not going to lose all of our funding, or people are going to not engage with us anymore because we tried this thing. So status quo bias is something that we definitely have to talk more about in this mission driven sector, because we often default to this and our organizations end up suffering, and our missions and the people that we serve, or the individuals that we serve, also end up suffering because we're stuck in the status quo bias. Okay. And so what do we do as leaders? What do you need to do? What's a leadership action you can take? Addressing status quo bias is not necessarily about changing everything. It's about staying connected to your purpose as an organization and really being willing to adjust how your work happens. So it's choosing to continue to stay curious, which is something all of you have talked about today, is asking questions and curiosity. Focusing on the impact instead of the habit of, we're in this habit of doing these things, but let's talk about how it's impacting the community. Is our impact growing? Is it staying the same, or is it getting less, right? So focusing on that instead of the behavior or the habit, and really making space for the organization to grow as context changes. So over time, being willing to shift really helps your teams to stay responsive and inclusive and really aligned with the communities that you serve. And so some language that might kind of help normalize this work is just, really asking, can we revisit this? Is this still working for us? Is this a process that's still working for us? Is this a relationship that's still working for us? Or are we continuing to engage with them because this is the status quo, right? What would we do differently if we were starting fresh? Would we have this $50,000 gala every year if we were just building this fresh, if we were starting from the beginning, right? Or would we focus on something differently? So it's really important that you're staying curious as you're working against the status quo bias. Okay. And then the last one is when a leader already believes someone is not a strong contributor, so they notice when that person is quiet or they miss the ways that they contribute in other settings. Feedback, data, and observations get filtered to match that belief. So I already have a belief in my mind about someone. I had an experience with them, or someone else told me about an experience with them. And so because I already believe this about this person, I look for things to kind of ensure that, hey, yes, actually, I was right about that person. Because, see, here's an example of that. You all are saying B, 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 B. So absolutely smart. Exactly. This is a confirmation bias. So this is where we look for information that supports what we already believe, and we overlook anything that challenges it. And confirmation bias is something that is like very prevalent right now, just with all that's changing in our world. People pick a stance and then they choose to only see things through that lens, right? And so they look for anything that's going to confirm what they already believe. And so confirmation bias is something that often comes up in a workspace because as leaders, we can have a belief about someone or something or about a process. And so we will notice things, or we will pull up things that will help confirm that. And it's really, really important that we move away from a confirmation bias, because it is not an inclusive way for us to engage not only with our team members, but with our partners, with our other stakeholders. We don't want to unintentionally create some type of understanding about a person or an entity through confirmation bias. And so what is one way that we can kind of work against that as leaders? We can build shared decision-making practices. So when decisions are made by a small group of people, or even just by one person, and all of those individuals have similar perspectives, confirmation bias really strengthens. It is more prevalent in those types of settings where there is a lack of diversity, even in thought and approach. And so you really want to shift from groups of people who always agree about the same thing. So when I work with leaders, sometimes they're like, oh, we never have conflict on our team. We all agree. We always agree on how to approach things. And I'm like, okay, let's unravel that a little bit, because maybe the team is not as diverse as you think that it is, right? It may look diverse, but if you all think and agree on things all the time the same way, there's probably some perspective that's missing from the way that you are approaching things. And so, as leaders, you really want to invite input from different levels of the organization, not just from other people in leadership, but people who are volunteering with the organization, people who are doing direct service, people who are impacted by the work that you do, people who are invested in the work that you do, right? You want to invite input, especially for big decisions, from everyone, from different levels, because it ensures that all of those perspectives are thought about and engaging in this decision-making process. You also never want to forget about the people who are closest to the work. So when we move into leadership, or sometimes we come into an organization, we go straight into leadership, there is this lack of just lived experience in that role. And so there's so much value in being willing and able to engage with people who are closer to the work, who are experiencing what's happening in the field. And then also creating space for disagreement before final decisions. So if you're making a decision about something, being willing to say, you don't have to agree with me on this decision. You know, if there's any feedback or any thoughts, I would love to hear it. Please share it with me. That will really help us to kind of move away from confirmation bias.
And Renisha, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A pod as well. I want to make sure that we get to.
Yes.
So we have one question that is, what is anchoring bias? And you may have already answered this, but I just want to make sure that we cover it.
Okay, which one was it? What
Anchoring
kind?
bias?
Anchoring bias. So anchoring bias is sort of like confirmation bias, but anchoring bias is when you anchor your thoughts or your decisions on one perspective, right? Or one, you choose, and there's one perspective or one decision or one body of data, of information, and you anchor everything into that. Right. So you're not inviting in any other perspectives. You're not bringing in any other types of information to inform you about how to move forward. And again, all bias is natural. It's very natural for us to be like, well, this is what I know. I'm going to anchor in that and I'm going to get stuck in that. Right. And so that's why curiosity is so super important.
Yep. And then one more question. It's just a reminder to go over the halo effect.
Yes. So the halo effect is when someone does something amazing, right? So you have someone on your team and you have like this huge issue and this huge problem or whatever, and they fixed it for you right away. And you're like, oh my goodness, this person is so great. They're amazing. Halo bias says that you've had this one very, very positive experience with this person, and now they can do nothing wrong, right? There's just this halo effect of like they cannot make any mistakes, they can't do anything wrong, they can't say anything wrong. You know, I will never see them except in that one context of when they were just doing everything right. And there's no problem with recognizing and understanding when people do a great job at their work and what they're doing. But the reality is we are all humans. And even as someone who works in the space of inclusive leadership, in a space of DEI, in a space of ensuring that teams work well together, I don't even always get it right. But that's okay because I am always willing to learn and to engage. And so halo bias kind of puts on that veil of, hey, you know, this, I see this person this one way, and so I'm not going to allow myself to see them any other type of way, even when it's not in your best interest, like to promote them. Okay, well, just because you have this halo bias doesn't mean that this person has all the skill sets to match this job, but I'm going to promote them anyway because I have this bias about them. Is that everything, Casey?
Yep, that's it.
Okay, awesome. So I just want to share for you all before we move forward that in mission-driven spaces, decisions often really carry real impact for your communities. And so when you do not examine bias on an organizational level, decision-making can really unintentionally reinforce the inequities that your organization says you are trying to address. So most of us who work within nonprofits, we're trying to address some type of inequity that's happening for a certain community. And you could be unintentionally reinforcing reinforcing that if you are not examining bias on an organizational level. And so the goal is not to remove it because, again, it's natural, it's going to happen. It's not realistic to say we have a bias-free workspace, but the goal is to lead in a way that brings awareness to how they're showing up and creates processes that widen who is included in decisions and accounts for the fact that bias will exist. You have to account for it. Pretending that it doesn't exist will further reinforce bias within your workplace. So this is such an important part of being an inclusive leader. Okay. So now we're going to move into how we move from observation to action. So now that we know these things, we know what they look like in practice, we know what it means as an organization, we want to move from just observing it and knowing what it is to really being able to move forward in action. And one of the tools that I love to use is the ladder of inference. And this ladder really shows that we don't just see what's happening. As leaders, we quickly interpret it, we make meaning, and then we act on it right away, right? This tool helps us to slow down and really notice, what are we observing? What's the meaning that we're adding to this? And what conclusions are we drawing from this? So I want to start with a little activity, and I would love for you all to share in the chat with me, what do you see in this picture? Do you see a duck or do you see a rabbit? Someone says a duck. Somebody says both. Casey says, I saw a duck, then a rabbit. Lots of duck people, lots of people who can see both. Elvia says, now I see the rabbit, right? The duck first, both, the rabbit. So I want to highlight here, for each of us, when we looked at this picture, what we saw kind of felt like fact, right? So I immediately see a duck. I don't see anything else unless I make myself see the rabbit. So I only see a duck here. And so when I look at it, for a fact, to me, it's a duck, right? But we have to understand that what we see can sometimes actually be an interpretation. And then we have to then connect that we observe something. We focus on certain details. So for me, I focus on seeing, here is the rabbit's, here's the duck's beak. Here's his little eye. This is the back of his head and his neck. So then I start to focus on the details that say to me, of course, this is a duck, right? And then I add meaning to it. I say, oh, okay, this is an eye right here. He's facing this way with his mouth open. And then I start to draw conclusions. This is a very, very natural way of how our brains work. However, when you are using this ladder, you have to recognize and understand, just like when you saw that picture, you observed something and you moved very quickly to action. So you moved very quickly to looking at that and saying, okay, this is where I see a duck. And for those of you who were trying to see both, your mind moved really quickly to like, okay, I see a duck and now I can see how it is now a rabbit, right? Or vice versa. But most of that process is happening very automatically. Like no one is like stopping and saying, let me force myself to see this. You look at something and it is whatever you see it to be, right? But this is where bias really quietly shows up. It's not about, again, whether we have bias, but it's about how quickly we act on incomplete thinking. So as leaders, oftentimes we are acting on things or we're acting on situations without enough information because that's just how our brain works. So this tool really helps you to look at, what do you notice? What do you focus on? What meaning do you make? What do you decide? And then what do you do? So as a leader, what data do I have? What do I focus on? What do I select to focus on? What meaning do you make? How do you interpret a situation? What decisions do you make based on the way you interpreted it? And then what do you do? What is the action? And so for our next breakout, I'm going to ask you to apply this ladder of inference to this picture. So there's a picture here There's no context, but I would love for you in your breakout room to share with the other people within your room what you noticed. So what data are you seeing? What do you notice about this picture here? What do you focus on as an individual when you look at this, right? What meaning do you make? How do you interpret this? And then based on what you interpret, based on what you see here, what would you decide to do? If you walked in and you saw this, what would your decision, what would your action be? You know, after you made a conclusion about what's happening, what would your action be? And we are going to do 10 minutes in this breakout room. So I will share this slide into the breakout room so you have it, so you can use it as you all are using this photo to kind of move up the ladder of inference. Everyone, I apologize if it was not super clear how the activity was supposed to unfold. So this is the image that we are applying the ladder of inference to. So looking at this image, you know, as individuals, what was it that you noticed? What did you focus on? You know, what data are you using? What did you select? What meaning did you make? How did you interpret that? And then what did you decide? And what action did you take? So you didn't have to necessarily like decide on one situation. It was just, you know, dialogue around, you know, this is what I noticed, or this is what I focused on. And I saw that it looked like room 5 was having a really robust discussion. So Martha, Rhonda, Ronnie, would one of you be willing to kind of share how you applied the ladder to this image that you saw?
We it was different perspectives. I'll just speak for mine, but but I saw her, you know, I have a clinical background as well. I'm like,
Mhm.
I would ask her, "Are you okay?" You
Mhm.
know, I wouldn't really push her to join the group. I'd be like, "Are you okay? You know, you can join us. We're talking about X, Y, and Z. And if not, just checking in. You can sit there and we can check in later." But I also made a joke. I'd be like, "Should we all leave the room? Are we safe?" Because she looked like she mad at the same time. But that was my conclusion. But I had to check in. You know what I mean? That would
Yes.
be it.
Yes, thank you so much for sharing. And you made a really great point is some people look at her body language and it looks like she's mad. Some people look at it, it's like, oh, she's in deep thought. She's just taking a break from the group. She's thinking, you know, about what's going on and what's happening. So all of us take different data from this one image, right? All of us are looking at different things. Some people focus in on the notebook and the fact that she's writing things down. So maybe she's in deep thought and she's trying to figure out, you know, a solution to bring back to the team. Whereas other people focus more on like what's happening with the other people. They look like they're smiling and they're happy, and she doesn't look that way. So the purpose of using this tool is the fact of the matter is that we all notice something differently. And so for any given situation as a leader, you are pulling out, you're selecting data based on what you see, what you know, what you think. And then you make meaning of it. Oftentimes, without even thinking about it, without asking any questions, without taking time to step back and consider and think, you start to interpret things, right? Like, just like Ms. Rhonda said, oh, do we need to leave the room? She looks upset, right? She started to kind of interpret, make an interpretation based on the data that she collected. And then, you know, she started to formalize a decision, a conclusion, and then action based on that. And as leaders, we have to recognize that we move very fast up the ladder. And sometimes incomplete data can really lead us to real consequences that show up in our leadership. So this goes back to what we shared earlier about making time to slow down, to ask questions, to not move from data to action so quickly because we know that's the way our mind works, but we have to learn to slow it down and to make space in between the data and the action to really be able to make informed decisions and to be more inclusive leaders. So for our last 8 minutes together, I am going to ask that you all either have a pen and paper if you have some nearby handy. If not, you can make a note in your phone, or you can pull up whatever word processing app, Google, whatever you need. But I'm going to ask you all to have something to record on for this last 8 minutes. And so I want to start by just sharing with you that inclusive leadership, some of the core practices around that is really knowing that clarity is something that builds trust. Consistency is something that builds safety for your team. So the more consistent you can be with the way that you show up, the more consistency. I say safety, but also safety is subjective, right? So the more you will find that people are willing to engage with you because you're consistent and they know what to anticipate. And then lastly, curiosity is something that builds connection. So the more curious you can be, the more that you can ask questions, be open to learning, the better that you will connect with the people around you. And we all know how important connection is in this work. And so one of the first practices that I want you to engage with is setting clear expectations. And so I would love for you to consider writing down what's an expectation that you have on your team right now that may be a little vague. It might not be as clear as it could be. Equity is something that requires clarity and not assumptions. And we really have to say what success looks like. And I will give an example of this. If you've ever done any trainings with me before, you've probably heard me say this. I grew up and started my career in Georgia. And when I moved to California, my first day of work, they were like, dress professional. And so I came and I had my skirt and I had my heels on and I had my blazer on. And I walked in the office and there were people in jeans. There were people with polo golf shirts on. And I was like, oh my goodness, they told me to dress professional. What is this? Right? Because in the South, when they say dress professional, they have a different expectation of what professional dress is versus out here in the West, right? And so to me, that was a really clear example of expectations that are not as clear as we want them to be, right? Sometimes we ask people to dress professional, to communicate well, but we don't make that expectation very clear. What does that look like in practice? And so write down one expectation that you as a leader may have on your team right now that might be a little vague that you could potentially clear up. The second practice is to write one way that you can make space for more voices on your team. So creating space for voice, knowing that not everyone participates the same way, that inclusion requires multiple pathways. So like today we've said, you can write in the chat, you can write it down, you can come off mute, you can do small groups, right? You can have follow-up opportunities. What is one way that you can make space for different and more voices on your team as a leader? Whether you have open office time, whatever you feel like you can do to make people make space for more voices to be uplifted is something that I would love for you to write down. The third practice is feedback with care and accountability. So here I would like for you to write down one piece of feedback that you need to give right now, whether that's to yourself or to someone on your team or to someone that you report to or someone that reports to you, or it even can be someone who is a colleague, right? But know that feedback is a big part of equity. And avoiding feedback creates inequity. So when you're giving feedback, you always want to be able to name what you observed, share the impact, and then invite reflection. But one mini practice that I would like for you to write down is one piece of feedback that you know that you need to give right now to someone in the workplace. Right. So those are 3 mini practices that I hope that you will take away from our time together, and that between now and next week, you will implement. Those are 3 things that you can do right away to be a more inclusive leader. And I also just want to leave you with that systems are important here, not just individuals, right? So challenges are not only about people, but it's also about patterns. It's about the policies and the norms and the habits that we all have that reinforce inequity. Who our meetings are designed for or how decisions are made. And so it's important that we recognize this as inclusive leaders. Right. Any questions before we end our time together today?
We don't have any in the Q&A pod. I'm just responding to a chat just really quick.
Okay,
Um,
no problem. And I would just
yeah.
add that there's also a resource page that they're going to share with you all. The understanding the ladder of inference might be good because we didn't spend as much time on that as we probably should have. I recognize that now. And there are some other books and podcasts that are great to help you continue to further your inclusive leadership. And I just want to thank you all so much for being here, for caring about how you show up, caring about your teams and your missions. And I will pass it back to Casey.
Great. Well, that brings us to a few minutes till the end of our time together. So we might be letting you out a few minutes early, which is nice. So if you can go ahead, we're going to drop the link in the chat for you to the survey. Lana already read my thoughts. So she's dropped the link for you in the chat. You can go ahead and click that and fill out that survey. As I mentioned, at the beginning of the training, that survey will lead you directly to your certificate of attendance that you'll be able to receive for today's training. And then also keep an eye out on the email that you use to register for today's training. That's where you're going to get today's recording of the training. You're going to receive that resource handout that Renisha just mentioned, as well as the note-taking slides. So just in case you want to share this training with your coworkers, maybe you want to go over it in a strategic planning at the end of the year, whatever that may look like for you, this will be available on our website as well, but you'll have it in your follow-up email to share as you please as well. So with that being said, Renisha, thank you so much for your presentation today. It's always wonderful having you. We will have another training with Renisha here coming in June. So please stay tuned for that. You can find it on our upcoming trainings here in just a little while once we open registration for it. So keep an eye out for that. You can always sign up for our newsletter and get those emails as well to be able to see Renisha's upcoming training in June. So with that being said, we will go ahead and head out today. As I mentioned, that survey link is in the chat for you. It'll open up in a separate window. You can go ahead and open that and you can exit out of today's Zoom meeting and that should stay open. So have a great day. See you later.
Everyone.